London, 1850. The rain pattered against the windows of Willow and Sons Bookshop as Grace Wakefield arranged the new shipment of leather-bound novels on the front display table. The small bell above the door chimed, and she looked up to see a man of considerable height ducking beneath the door frame. Water dripped from his expensive wool coat onto the worn floorboards of the shop. "Good afternoon, sir," Grace said, smoothing down her simple blue dress. "May I be of assistance?" The gentleman removed his hat, revealing dark hair peppered with silver at the temples. His eyes, the color of polished mahogany, surveyed the modest shop with a curious intensity. "I require a book," he said, his deep voice carrying the unmistakable polish of aristocratic education. Grace offered a small, patient smile. "You've come to the right place, then." A hint of amusement flickered across his severe features. "Indeed I have." He moved toward a shelf, running gloved fingers along the spines. "I need something extraordinary. Something to enliven a dreary country house party full of tedious people discussing more tedious affairs. Might I recommend Mr. Dickens' latest? Or perhaps something more adventurous?" "I've read Dickens," he interrupted. "And most everything else one would expect a man of my station to have read." Grace folded her hands before her. "And what station might that be, sir?" He turned to her fully then, seeming surprised by her direct question. Most shopkeepers didn't interrogate their customers, especially not those wearing clothes that cost more than their quarterly earnings. "Ryland. Lord Ryland Yates, Earl of Kenwick." He spoke his title as if it were a mere factual detail rather than the announcement that would send most shopkeepers into obsequious bowing. Grace merely nodded. "Well, Lord Kenwick, perhaps you might tell me what you enjoy reading when no one is watching. When you don't have to maintain appearances." His eyebrows rose slightly. An impertinent question from a shopkeeper. A necessary one from a bookseller, she countered. "Books are not hats or gloves, my lord. One cannot simply choose based on what's fashionable." The corner of his mouth twitched upward. "Sea voyages," he said after a moment. "Explorations of distant lands. Ancient civilizations." Grace's eyes brightened. "Wait here." She disappeared behind a stack of books into the back room. Lord Kenwick wandered the shop, noting the carefully arranged displays and the faint scent of lemon oil and old paper. The shop was modest but meticulously kept, with comfortable chairs tucked into corners and categorized sections that made browsing a pleasure rather than a chore. Grace returned carrying 3 volumes of varying sizes. "These might suit your interests, my lord." Newly published accounts of archaeological expeditions in Egypt, a sailor's journal from a voyage to the South Seas, and a history of the lost civilizations of the Americas. He accepted them, examining each with genuine interest. "How did you come to have such specific works in a shop this size?" "My father believed in curating rather than simply stocking," Grace explained. "When he passed, I continued his practice of selecting books that offer genuine discovery rather than merely what publishers push as popular." "Your father was the proprietor before you?" "Yes. Thomas Wakefield. He founded Willow and Sons 30 years ago." "There are no sons, I take it." A shadow passed over Grace's features. "My brother died in the Crimea." "I'm sorry," Lord Kenwick said, his voice softening. "I lost friends there as well." Grace nodded, accepting his condolence without further comment. "Will any of these do, my lord?" He selected 2 of the volumes. "These shall accompany me to Bedfordshire. What is your opinion on them?" The Egyptian expedition is meticulously documented but lacks literary flair. The South Sea Journal is quite the opposite, perhaps embellished in parts, but written with such vivacity you can almost feel the salt spray on your face. Lord Kenwick studied her with undisguised interest. "You've read them all?" "Every book in this shop," she confirmed. "A woman with a remarkable education." "A woman with access to books and the desire to read them," she corrected. "Nothing remarkable about that." As she wrapped his purchases in brown paper tied with twine, he asked, "Do you make recommendations often?" "Only when asked, my lord." "And how frequently do customers ask?" More often than you might imagine, Grace replied. People are often lost when it comes to what they truly wish to read. And you help them find their way. She handed him the parcel. I try. Lord Kenwick paid, leaving considerably more than the books were worth. When Grace attempted to give him his change, he waved it away. For your excellent counsel, he said. I suspect these will indeed relieve the tedium of forced society. You don't enjoy social gatherings? Grace asked, then immediately regretted the personal nature of the question. Instead of taking offense, he considered it thoughtfully. I enjoy meaningful conversation. Those are rare in ballrooms and drawing rooms where everyone is performing rather than speaking. Like characters in a poorly written novel, Grace said. Precisely. He smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his austere features. Thank you, Miss Wakefield. He replaced his hat and departed into the rain, leaving Grace staring after him, wondering what strange wind had blown an earl into her humble shop. 3 weeks later, the bell chimed again, and Lord Kenwick reappeared, this time accompanied by a gentleman of similar age but more relaxed bearing. Miss Wakefield, Lord Kenwick said with a nod. I've returned, as promised. Grace had no recollection of any promise, but she smiled politely. Welcome back, my lord. The books were exceptional. Particularly the South Sea Journal, as you predicted. He gestured to his companion. This is Lord Hartley, who refused to believe a small bookshop in an unfashionable part of London could possibly contain treasures superior to Hatchard's. Lord Hartley offered a slight bow. I am prepared to be educated, Miss Wakefield. What sort of books interest you, Lord Hartley? Grace asked. Poetry, he replied. Contemporary works, not the classics everyone pretends to adore. Grace considered this. We've received several new collections. Mr. Tennyson, of course, but also lesser-known poets who write with similar passion but different perspectives. While she helped Lord Hartley, Lord Kenwick browsed, occasionally pulling a volume from the shelves and reading a passage before replacing it. When Lord Hartley had made his selections, Lord Kenwick approached the counter with a book of his own. You seem to find my selections inadequate, Grace observed, wrapping Lord Hartley's purchases. On the contrary, Lord Kenwick replied. I'm expanding my horizons. You've recommended adventure, now I seek understanding of human nature. He placed a volume of essays on the counter. An interesting choice, Grace said. Rather philosophical. I've been thinking about what you said about people performing rather than speaking. These essays explore the masks we wear in society. I wasn't aware my casual observation warranted such scholarly follow-up, Grace said. I find that casual observations often contain more truth than carefully constructed arguments, Lord Kenwick replied. Will you recommend something to accompany this? Grace hesitated, then walked to a shelf near the window. She returned with a slim volume. This might interest you. It's a novel, but unlike any other, an exploration of a woman's inner thoughts as she navigates society's expectations. Written by a woman. Yes. Published under a pseudonym, of course. Lord Kenwick added it to his purchase without question. After the men departed, Grace found herself distracted throughout the afternoon, wondering what the Earl of Kenwick would make of a novel written from a woman's perspective, one that criticized the very foundations of the society in which he was privileged. It became a pattern. Every few weeks, Lord Kenwick would appear, sometimes alone, sometimes with friends he seemed determined to convert to the charms of Willow and Sons. Each visit lasted longer than the last, their conversations extending beyond literary recommendations to discussions of the books themselves. Grace learned that Lord Kenwick had travelled extensively in his youth, that he managed several estates with progressive agricultural methods, and that he found most London society events unbearable but attended them out of duty to his family name. My mother insists I find a wife, he confided during his 5th visit, while examining a map in an atlas. She's invited half the eligible young ladies in England to our summer estate party. How terrible for you, Grace said dryly, to be surrounded by beautiful women vying for your attention and your title. He looked up, catching her teasing tone. You misunderstand. I have no objection to marriage. Only to the theatrical performance of courtship, where neither party reveals anything genuine about themselves until it's too late. Perhaps you should hand each lady a book and observe what she makes of it, Grace suggested. Character reveals itself in reading preferences. An excellent strategy, Miss Wakefield. I shall require a crate of varied volumes. She laughed, but to her surprise, he was serious. Over the next week, he selected 30 different books ranging from philosophy to poetry to lurid Gothic novels. Grace helped him create a diverse collection, curious about the women who would be subjected to this unusual test of character. You must tell me the results, she said as the books were being loaded into his carriage. Better yet, he replied, you should see for yourself. Grace blinked. I beg your pardon. The estate library requires cataloguing. My late father left it in disarray, and I've been meaning to properly organize it. You would be compensated handsomely. You're offering me employment. I'm offering you an escape from London's summer heat and the opportunity to explore a library that hasn't been properly appreciated in a generation. He paused. And yes, compensation for your expertise. Grace should have refused immediately. It was improper, despite the veneer of professional employment. Yet the thought of a vast, neglected library waiting to be restored was irresistible. Who would mind the shop, she asked. You have no assistant. My cousin comes in occasionally, but not regularly enough to manage alone. Lord Kenwick considered this. The house party begins in 3 weeks and lasts a month. Could your cousin not manage for that period, with perhaps another temporary assistant? Grace thought of her cousin Emily, who had been asking for more responsibility. And their neighbor's daughter, Sarah, was looking for employment and had a good head for figures. I'll consider it, she said. Lord Kenwick looked pleased. Excellent. I shall send formal details by messenger. After he left, Grace stood amidst the shelves, wondering what madness had possessed her to even contemplate such an arrangement. Yet the promise of a grand library, and the chance to observe Lord Kenwick's unusual courtship strategy, was too intriguing to dismiss outright. Kenwick Hall was more imposing than Grace had imagined. The Elizabethan manor house sprawled across the Bedfordshire countryside, its sandstone facade glowing golden in the summer sun. As the carriage approached through an avenue of ancient oaks, Grace felt a flutter of apprehension. What had seemed a reasonable adventure in London now felt like terrible presumption. She was met in the grand entrance hall by the housekeeper, Mrs. Billington, a formidable woman who regarded Grace with barely concealed suspicion. His lordship has placed you in the east wing, she said, leading Grace up the grand staircase. Near the library, but separate from the main guest quarters. That's very considerate, Grace replied, though she understood the arrangement was designed to minimize scandal. A shopkeeper among aristocratic guests would raise eyebrows regardless, but housing her among the noble ladies would have caused outright indignation. Her room was larger than her entire London flat above the bookshop, a spacious chamber with tall windows overlooking the formal gardens. A small sitting room adjoined it, and beyond that was a door that Mrs. Billington explained connected directly to the library. His lordship thought you might wish to work at odd hours, she said. This way you needn't walk the main corridors. Again, Grace understood the subtext, she was to make herself scarce when the guests were about. When shall I meet with Lord Kenwick to discuss the library project? His lordship is currently occupied with the arrival of guests. He asked that you begin your assessment of the library and he will join you when time permits. Mrs. Billington's tone suggested that time might never permit. Left alone, Grace changed from her travel clothes into a simple dark blue dress suitable for work. Through the connecting door, she entered the library and caught her breath. The room was magnificent, 2 stories tall with a gallery running around the upper level, accessible by a spiral staircase of wrought iron. Thousands of books lined the walls, many showing signs of neglect, faded spines, dust, improper shelving. A massive oak desk occupied the center of the room, while reading nooks with comfortable chairs were tucked between the tall windows. Grace walked slowly around the ground floor, running her fingers along spines, examining random volumes. Many were first editions, some quite rare. Others were commonplace but had beautiful bindings. There was no discernible organization, novels mixed with scientific treatises, poetry interspersed with agricultural manuals. She was examining a particularly fine atlas when the library door opened. Lord Kenwick entered, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him in London. His formal evening attire suited him, emphasizing his height and the breadth of his shoulders. "Miss Wakefield," he said, smiling. "I see you've discovered the scope of the challenge." "It's magnificent chaos," she replied. "How did it come to be in such disarray?" "My father was an enthusiastic collector but not a meticulous one. After my mother died, he retreated here and ordered books by the crate. I don't believe anyone has properly catalogued the collection in 20 years. It will take more than a month. Consider this a beginning, then. Focus on the most valuable or interesting works first." Grace nodded. "I shall need proper materials, ledgers, ink, labels. Already ordered from London. They should arrive tomorrow." He moved to join her at the Atlas stand. "What do you make of it so far?" "It's extraordinary. There are works here I've only read about. First editions of Wollstonecraft, Shelley, even this atlas is remarkably detailed for its period." Lord Kenwick smiled at her enthusiasm. "I knew you would appreciate it." He glanced at the clock on the mantel. "I must return to my guests, but I wanted to ensure you were settled." "Quite comfortable, thank you. Tomorrow evening there's to be a musical recital followed by cards. You're welcome to attend." Grace shook her head. "I believe it's best if I focus on my work, my lord. I wouldn't want to cause any awkwardness." "As you wish." He seemed about to say more but instead gave a slight bow. "Good evening, Miss Wakefield." After he departed, Grace continued her exploration of the library, making notes on what she found. It wasn't until she returned to her room well past midnight that she realized Lord Kenwick had never actually discussed payment or specific expectations for the cataloguing project. He had simply assumed she would know what to do, and she did. The next week passed in a pleasant routine. Grace rose early, took breakfast in her room, and spent the day in the library, emerging only for a short walk in the gardens when the weather permitted. She occasionally glimpsed the house party guests from a distance, elegant ladies in summer dresses, gentlemen in riding clothes or evening attire. Lord Kenwick visited the library daily, ostensibly to check on her progress but increasingly to discuss the books she was cataloguing. He seemed genuinely interested in her observations and frequently asked her opinion on volumes he remembered from childhood. "You've organized the natural philosophy section beautifully," he said one afternoon, examining the newly labeled shelves. "I had no idea we possess so many works on astronomy." "Your father appears to have been particularly interested in the subject," Grace replied. "Some of these are quite advanced mathematical treatises." "He was educated as an engineer before inheriting the title," Lord Kenwick explained. "He never lost his fascination with the practical applications of science. That explains the extensive collection on agricultural improvements and steam engines." "Yes, though the novels were my mother's domain. She adored the Brontes." "I've set those aside for special attention," Grace said. "There are several first editions." Lord Kenwick smiled. "She would appreciate your care." He walked to the window, looking out at the garden where several young ladies were gathered around a tea table. "How are you finding country life, Miss Wakefield?" "Peaceful. The air agrees with me." "But you miss your shop." "Of course. It's my home and my livelihood." He turned back to her. "Have you always wanted to be a bookseller?" Grace considered the question. "I never considered any other path. Books have been my companion since childhood. When my father fell ill, it seemed natural to take over the shop." "Even though it's unusual for a woman?" "Many things that are unusual are nevertheless right," she replied. "Besides, customers often find it easier to discuss certain books with a woman. Such as the novel you recommended to me, the one about a woman's inner thoughts." "Did you read it?" "Twice," he admitted. "It was illuminating." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a young woman at the library door, one of the house party guests, a beautiful blonde in an elaborate day dress of pale green silk. "There you are, Lord Kenwick. We were wondering where you'd disappeared to." Her gaze fell on Grace, and her smile cooled several degrees. "Oh, I didn't realize you were occupied with your librarian." "Miss Wakefield is cataloguing the collection," Lord Kenwick said, his tone noticeably more formal. "Miss Wakefield, may I present Lady Philippa Dorchester?" Grace curtsied slightly. "My lady." Lady Philippa barely acknowledged the greeting. "Everyone is gathering for the archery competition, Ryland. You promised to partner with me, remember?" "Of course," he said smoothly. "I'll join you directly." With a last curious glance at Grace, Lady Philippa retreated. "You should go," Grace said, turning back to her ledger. "Lady Philippa seems eager for your company." "Lady Philippa is eager for my title," Lord Kenwick replied dryly. "Her father's estates adjoin mine, and she's been raised with the expectation of joining them through marriage." "A practical arrangement," Grace observed. "Practical, yes. But I find myself increasingly unwilling to settle for mere practicality." He moved toward the door. "Enjoy your afternoon, Miss Wakefield." As the house party continued, Grace became increasingly aware of the various ladies vying for Lord Kenwick's attention. From her window, she observed their strategies, the demure Miss Ellis with her watercolors, the vivacious Lady Philippa organizing games and outings, the serious Miss Thornfield discussing politics with Kenwick's male guests to demonstrate her intelligence. What she found most intriguing, however, was that Lord Kenwick's book experiment appeared to be yielding results. During his library visits, he would report on which lady had chosen which volume and what they had said about their selections. Lady Philippa claimed to adore the poetry but couldn't recall a single line when questioned, he said one evening, lounging in an armchair while Grace worked at the desk. Miss Ellis chose a volume of fairy tales and seemed genuinely enchanted by them. "And Miss Thornfield?" Grace asked, having noticed he mentioned her frequently. "Selected Malthus and had intelligent observations about population theory," he admitted. Though she confessed she found novels frivolous. "A cardinal sin," Grace said with mock solemnity. Lord Kenwick laughed. "In your estimation, certainly. Books should enlarge one's world, not confine it," Grace said. "Dismissing entire categories of literature suggests a narrow mind." "Precisely my thought," he said, looking at her with warmth that made her heart flutter unexpectedly. "Your mother must be pleased with the candidates," Grace said, changing the subject. His expression sobered. "She has her preferences, certainly." "And you? Have your literary insights revealed a suitable countess?" Lord Kenwick stood and walked to the window, his back to her. "I'm beginning to think my experiment has proven only what I already suspected, that genuine connection is rare and precious, and not necessarily found where society dictates one should look." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Grace busied herself with her cataloguing, trying to ignore the sudden tension. "I should return to my guests," he said finally. "Good evening, Miss Wakefield." The situation came to a head a week later, when Grace was working late in the library. Most of the house party had gone riding that day, and the evening entertainment was to be a small orchestral performance in the music room. Grace had taken advantage of the quiet to focus on cataloguing a particularly challenging section of theological texts. The library door opened, and to her surprise, Lady Philippa entered, followed by two other young ladies, Miss Ellis and a third woman Grace didn't recognize. "So this is where Ryland disappears to each day," Lady Philippa said, her voice carrying a slight edge. "How rustic." Grace set down her pen. "Good evening, ladies. May I help you find something to read?" "We're not here for books," Lady Philippa said. "We're curious about you, Miss Wakefield, was it? The mysterious bookshop owner who has so captivated our host." "I'm simply cataloguing Lord Kenwick's library," Grace replied evenly. "A professional engagement." The third lady, whom Grace now recognized as the Honourable Miss Trenton, laughed softly. "Professional, indeed. Is that what they're calling it now?" Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks but maintained her composure. If you're not interested in the library, perhaps you would be more comfortable elsewhere. I believe the musical entertainment begins shortly. Oh, we have time, Lady Philippa said, moving to examine Grace's work. Tell us, Miss Wakefield, how exactly does a shopkeeper become the private librarian to an earl? It must be quite a fascinating story. Lord Kenwick visited my bookshop in London and appreciated my knowledge of literature, Grace said. There's nothing more to tell. I'm sure, Lady Philippa said with exaggerated skepticism. Though it seems peculiar that he spends more time discussing books with you than attending to his actual guests. I cannot speak to how Lord Kenwick allocates his time, Grace said, rising from her chair. Now if you'll excuse me, we've offended her, Miss Ellis said, looking genuinely distressed. Perhaps we should go. Not quite yet, Lady Philippa replied, stepping closer to Grace. I merely want to understand what fascination a common shopkeeper holds for a man like Ryland Yates. Lady Philippa, came a stern voice from the doorway. All four women turned to see the Dowager Countess of Kenwick standing there, her elegant figure silhouetted against the hall light. This behavior is unbecoming. Lady Philippa immediately adopted a contrite expression. Lady Kenwick, we were just making spectacles of yourselves, the Dowager finished for her. Miss Ellis, Miss Trenton, your mothers are looking for you. The musicians are about to begin. The two younger women hurried from the room, followed by a reluctant Lady Philippa who shot a final glare at Grace. When they were gone, the Dowager entered the library fully, her assessing gaze taking in Grace and the work spread across the desk. So you are the bookseller who has my son neglecting his duties as host, she said, though her tone lacked the venom of Lady Philippa's remarks. I apologize if my presence has been disruptive, my lady, Grace said, cursing. That was never my intention. The Dowager waved away her apology. My son does as he pleases. He always has. She moved to examine the newly organized shelves. You've made considerable progress. Thank you, my lady. Ryland speaks highly of your knowledge and taste in literature. His lordship is generous in his assessment. The Dowager turned to study Grace directly. She was a handsome woman in her 60s, with the same intense brown eyes as her son and an air of unquestionable authority. Miss Wakefield, I shall be direct. My son is an earl with considerable responsibilities. He requires a suitable match, someone who understands the demands of his position and can navigate the complexities of society. I'm well aware of Lord Kenwick's station, my lady, Grace replied. I have no illusions about my place here. The Dowager's expression softened slightly. I believe you. Which puts you ahead of most of the young ladies currently under my roof. She sighed. My son values your conversation and your mind. That much is obvious. But you must understand that nothing more can come of this friendship. There is nothing more, my lady, Grace assured her, though the words caused an unexpected pain in her chest. I am here to catalogue books, nothing else. Good. The Dowager nodded. Then we understand each other. She moved toward the door, then paused. The blue section, that was my particular collection. You've arranged it beautifully. Your taste in literature is exceptional, my lady. The Dowager smiled faintly. My husband used to say the same. With that, she departed, leaving Grace alone with the uncomfortable realization that her feelings for Lord Kenwick had grown far beyond professional admiration. The following day, Grace worked with renewed focus, determined to complete as much of the cataloguing as possible before departing. She had decided it would be best to leave Kenwick Hall earlier than planned. Her presence was causing gossip among the guests and creating an awkward situation for Lord Kenwick. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice his entrance until he spoke. You've been avoiding me, Lord Kenwick said, closing the library door behind him. Grace looked up, startled. I've been working, my lord. There's a difference. You weren't at breakfast, and when I came earlier, the door to your quarters was locked. I took breakfast in my room and went for a walk in the gardens. She returned to her ledger. I'm trying to complete the most important sections before I leave. Leave. He crossed to her desk. You're not due to depart for another fortnight. I think it best if I return to London sooner. I've accomplished the essential cataloguing, and detailed instructions can be left for whoever continues the work. Lord Kenwick frowned. Has something happened? Has someone been unkind? Grace hesitated. Your guests are naturally curious about my presence, which is creating unnecessary distractions for you as host. You're referring to Lady Philippa's visit yesterday. It wasn't a question. My mother informed me of the incident. Then you understand why it's better for me to go. No, I don't understand at all, he said, his voice rising slightly. I want you here, Grace. It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it startled her into meeting his gaze. You invited me here to catalogue your library, she said carefully. And that task is nearly complete. That was my stated reason, yes. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she had never seen from him before. But it wasn't my only motivation. Lord Kenwick, Ryland, he corrected. My name is Ryland. Grace stood, needing to put distance between them. This is precisely the problem. Your mother is right, you have responsibilities, expectations. I am a distraction you cannot afford. You've spoken with my mother. His expression darkened. She spoke with me, Grace clarified. And she was entirely correct in her assessment of the situation. Which was? That whatever friendship has developed between us cannot progress further. The differences in our stations are insurmountable. Lord Kenwick, Ryland, stepped closer. Is that what you believe? That birth and title are what matter most. They matter to the world we live in, Grace replied. You know this better than anyone. I know that I've spent my entire life performing the role expected of me, he said. Until I walked into your bookshop and, for the first time, felt seen for myself rather than my title. Ryland, no, let me finish. His eyes were intent on hers. You asked me once what I enjoyed reading when no one was watching. The truth is, before meeting you, I rarely experienced that freedom, to simply be myself without consideration for how it would appear to others. And what does that have to do with me leaving Kenwick Hall? Everything. He took her hand, his touch warm and certain. I arranged this house party at my mother's insistence, inviting eligible young ladies from the finest families. And all I can think about, day after day, is escaping to the library to discuss books with the woman who sees beyond Lord Kenwick to Ryland. Grace's heart pounded, but she forced herself to be practical. This infatuation, it is not infatuation, he interrupted firmly. It is recognition. Of a mind that challenges mine, a spirit that values substance over appearance, and a heart that, I hope, might come to care for me as I have come to care for you. You barely know me, Grace protested weakly. I know that you read every book in your shop. That you value honesty above politeness. That you see the world with uncommon clarity and speak of it with uncommon grace. He smiled at his inadvertent pun. I know that you love your bookshop but dream of having time to write your own stories. She looked up in surprise. How did you mentioned it once, in passing. You said you kept a journal of tales inspired by your customers. His thumb traced circles on her palm. I know more about you after 3 months of conversation than I know about women I've been acquainted with for years. Grace gently withdrew her hand. Even if that's true, it doesn't change reality. You are an earl. I am a shopkeeper. Society would never accept such a match. Society can adapt, Ryland said. It has before. Your mother would never approve. My mother wants my happiness. She may take time to adjust to the idea, but she will accept my choice. Grace shook her head. This is madness. What about your guests? The eligible young ladies you invited here specifically to choose a wife. I did choose, he said simply. The moment I walked into Willow & Sons and a bookseller asked me what I enjoyed reading when no one was watching. Before Grace could respond, the library door opened again. The Dowager Countess entered, her expression unreadable as she took in the scene before her. "I thought I might find you here, Ryland," she said. "Your guests are wondering where you've disappeared to." Again. Ryland straightened but didn't step away from Grace. "Mother, I was just explaining to Miss Wakefield why I wish her to remain at Kenwick Hall." "Indeed?" The dowager's gaze moved between them. "And does Miss Wakefield share your desire?" "I believe it would be best if I returned to London, my lady," Grace said. "Because of our conversation yesterday. Because it is the sensible course of action." The dowager sighed. "I'm not certain sensibility is what's called for in this situation." She moved further into the room, closing the door behind her. "Ryland, I assume you've made your feelings clear to Miss Wakefield." "I have," he confirmed. "And you are determined in this matter?" "Completely." The dowager nodded, as if having confirmed what she already knew. She turned to Grace. "Miss Wakefield, my son can be stubborn to a fault. Once his mind is set, very little will change it. A family trait, I'm afraid." "I understand, my lady, but, please, let me finish." The dowager's tone was kind but firm. "Yesterday, I spoke to you as the Countess of Kenwick, concerned with lineage and propriety and social standing. Today, I wish to speak as a mother." She moved to a nearby chair and sat, arranging her skirts around her. "When I married Ryland's father, it was an arranged match. We were fortunate to develop genuine affection over time, but it was not love that brought us together. It was land and titles and family expectations." She looked directly at Grace. "I would not wish such a beginning for my son." "Mother," Ryland began, but she held up a hand to silence him. "I watched you catalogue my books, Miss Wakefield. You handled them with knowledge and reverence. You understood why they mattered to me." Her expression softened. "Just as you seem to understand my son in ways that have eluded the parade of suitable young ladies who have passed through this house over the years." Grace didn't know how to respond. This was not the conversation she had expected. "Society will talk," the dowager continued. "There will be raised eyebrows and whispers behind fans. Some doors may close to you both." She glanced at her son. "Are you prepared for that, Ryland?" "Completely," he said again, without hesitation. The dowager turned back to Grace. "And you, Miss Wakefield? Are you prepared to face the challenges of becoming a countess? To leave your bookshop and enter a world that may not immediately welcome you?" Grace looked between mother and son, stunned by the turn the conversation had taken. I haven't considered it." "Then perhaps you should," the dowager said, rising. "Thoroughly and honestly. My son deserves nothing less than a woman who enters this family with her eyes open to both its privileges and its burdens." She moved to the door. "Ryland, your guests are expecting you for the afternoon drive. It would be impolite to disappoint them." With that, she departed, leaving an astonished silence in her wake. "Did your mother just give her blessing?" Grace finally asked. Ryland looked as surprised as she felt. "I believe she did, in her own way." "This is happening too quickly," Grace said, pressing her hands to her temples. "Yesterday she was warning me to remember my place, and today she's discussing the challenges I would face as a countess." "My mother is nothing if not practical," Ryland said, a smile tugging at his lips. "Once she realized my mind was made up, she shifted her focus to ensuring the transition would be successful rather than fighting a battle she couldn't win." "Your mind is made up," Grace repeated. "But mine is not, Ryland. This is overwhelming." He nodded, sobering. "Of course. I've had months to recognize my feelings, while you've had mere minutes to absorb my declaration." He took her hand again, raising it briefly to his lips. "Take the time you need, Grace. Consider everything, what you would gain and what you would sacrifice. I don't want your answer now. When do you want it?" "When you're certain, whatever that answer may be." He released her hand reluctantly. "I should join the driving party as my mother suggested. Will you be all right?" Grace nodded, unable to form words around the emotions crowding her throat. After he left, she sank into a chair, thoughts whirling. The idea that Ryland Yates, Earl of Kenwick, wanted to make her his wife was so far beyond anything she had imagined that she could scarcely comprehend it. What would it mean to leave her bookshop, her independence, her quiet life? To enter a world of titled nobility, grand estates, and social obligations? Could she be happy in such a life? Could she make Ryland happy? And yet, the thought of returning to London and never seeing him again left an ache in her chest that she couldn't ignore. For 3 days, Grace avoided Ryland, needing space to think. She worked in the library when she knew he would be occupied with guests, took meals in her room, and walked in the gardens at odd hours. He respected her need for distance, sending only a brief note acknowledging her desire for time to consider and assuring her that his feelings remained unchanged. On the 3rd evening, a knock came at her door just as she was preparing for bed. Expecting a maid, she was startled to find the Dowager Countess standing in the hallway. "May I come in?" the older woman asked. "Of course, my lady." Grace stepped aside, hastily tightening the sash of her dressing gown. The Dowager entered and glanced around the room. "I hope your accommodations have been comfortable." "Very, thank you." "Good." She moved to the window, looking out at the moonlit gardens. "My son is miserable, you know. He tries to hide it, but a mother sees these things." Grace didn't know how to respond. The Dowager turned from the window. "You've been avoiding him." "I needed time to think." "And have you?" "Thought." "Constantly," Grace admitted. "But I'm no closer to a decision." The Dowager nodded. "May I sit?" "Please." Grace gestured to the small settee near the fireplace and took the chair opposite. "When I married the Earl," the Dowager began, "I was terrified. Not of him, he was a kind man, but of failing in my duties as a countess. I had been raised for the role, of course, but theory and practice are very different things." "I haven't been raised for any such role," Grace pointed out. "No, but you possess qualities that cannot be taught: intelligence, adaptability, and a genuine interest in people and their stories." The Dowager smoothed her skirts. "The rest can be learned." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I suspect your hesitation stems not from lack of feeling for my son, but from doubt in your ability to be what he needs." Grace looked down at her hands. "That's part of it, yes. And the other part? I would have to give up my bookshop. My independence. The life I've built for myself." The Dowager considered this. "Must you give it up entirely? Could it not be managed by others while remaining yours?" "Perhaps, but marriage need not mean the death of your identity, Miss Wakefield. It can be a partnership that enhances rather than diminishes who you are." The Dowager's eyes grew distant. "My husband encouraged my love of literature. He built the Blue Library specifically for my collection. He sounds like a remarkable man." "He was. And his son is very much like him." The Dowager leaned forward slightly. "Ryland would not ask you to become someone you're not. He values precisely who you are. Even so, the transition would be difficult. Society adjusts to wealth and title, Miss Wakefield. There would be challenges initially, yes, but less than you might imagine." She rose to leave. "Think about what I've said. And know that should you choose to accept my son, you would have an ally in me." After the Dowager departed, Grace sat for a long time, considering her words. The idea that she might not have to abandon her bookshop entirely, that she could retain some connection to the life she had built, eased one of her major concerns. But was she prepared for the scrutiny, the responsibility, the fundamental change to everything she had known? And was she willing to risk Ryland's position and reputation on the chance that society would eventually accept her? Most importantly, did she love him enough to face these challenges? The answer came to her with surprising clarity. Yes. Yes, she did. The next morning, Grace rose early and went to the library. She had made her decision, but rather than seeking out Ryland immediately, she wanted to complete the work she had promised. It seemed important to honor that commitment before beginning something new. She was labeling the final shelf of rare volumes when the library door opened, and Ryland entered. He looked tired, with shadows beneath his eyes suggesting restless nights. "Good morning," he said, stopping a few feet away. "I didn't expect to find you here so early." "I'm finishing the cataloging," Grace replied. "The work you hired me to do. Is that all you've decided?" His voice was carefully neutral, but she could hear the tension beneath. Grace set down her pen and turned to face him fully. "No. I've made other decisions as well." "May I know what they are?" She took a deep breath. "I decided that I love my bookshop. That independence matters greatly to me. That entering society as a countess would be the most challenging thing I've ever attempted." His expression fell, but he nodded. "I understand." "No, I don't think you do," Grace said, stepping closer. "Because I've also decided that I love you more than my bookshop. That partnership can be a different kind of independence. And that difficult things are often the most worthwhile." Hope flared in his eyes. "Grace." "I love you, Ryland Yates," she said simply. "If you still want me as your wife, with all the complications that entails, then my answer is yes." In 2 strides, he closed the distance between them, gathering her in his arms. "Are you certain?" he asked, searching her face. "Completely," she said, echoing his earlier response to his mother. His kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with the release of days of uncertainty. When they finally parted, Grace rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "There will be challenges," he murmured into her hair. "I know. Some people will be unkind. I expect so. But we'll face it together," he promised. "And you'll never have to give up books or stories or the parts of yourself that matter." Grace smiled up at him. "I'll hold you to that, Lord Kenwick." "Please do, future Lady Kenwick." The title sounded strange to her ears, but not unpleasant. A new chapter beginning, rather than an old one ending. "What about your house party guests?" she asked suddenly. "How will you explain?" Ryland laughed. "Most of them are half expecting it already, thanks to Lady Philippa's gossip. My mother will manage the social niceties." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Are you worried?" "A little," she admitted. "But mostly I'm wondering what story we'll tell our grandchildren about how we met." His smile was radiant. "That's simple. We'll tell them the truth, that an earl walked into a bookshop looking for an escape from tedium, and instead found the love of his life among the shelves." "Rather romantic for an account of factual events," Grace teased. "The best stories always are," Ryland replied, and kissed her again among the books that had brought them together. In the years that followed, Willow and Sons flourished under the management of Grace's cousin Emily, with Grace herself making regular visits to oversee operations and select special volumes for the Kenwick Hall Library, which became renowned throughout England for its exceptional collection. Society's initial whispers about the bookshop countess gradually transformed into admiration as Grace established literary salons that attracted the finest minds of the age. The Dowager Countess became her staunchest ally and closest friend, teaching her the intricacies of aristocratic life while respecting her independent spirit. And in the quiet evenings at Kenwick Hall, Grace would often read aloud to her husband from the rarest treasure in their library, a leather-bound journal containing the stories she had begun to write during their courtship, tales of people who found themselves by losing their hearts to the most unexpected of companions. It was, they both agreed, the happiest of endings and the most promising of beginnings, a love story worthy of the finest novels on their shelves.